Good morning, folks. Here we are. It is Wednesday, February 3rd, end of our second marking period, the beginning of our third. We are now halfway through this year, and we started evolution this week. And so today what I want to do is I want to go through the introductions for it and kind of explain the basics and, of course, the most important individual that everybody should know going through this unit. So, starting that off. There we go. So evolution is this really amazing theory that biology has. And what it manages to do is it manages to take all the different realms of bio and glue them together and stick them together. Why are cells the size that they are? Why aren't they bigger? Well, we know that they need diffusion. What happened to the cells that were too big? They died. They never passed on. Their traits, their information. Why? Due to evolution. Why do we have animals that are so perfectly adapted for exactly what they do? Evolution. It takes so many different aspects of our science, and they all start to make sense when they come together through this. So evolution really is the best theory that we have. Remember, theories in biology are the same things as laws in physics. And it really explains why we have the variety of life, why we have the different species and all the different appearances and abilities and everything else. It's all due to evolution. Now, evolution is scientific fact. And one of the great things about this is the fact that so many people fought against evolution for so long that the evidence to support it became massive. The only individuals who can argue against the theory of evolution today are those that do not require science to prove their point. And so as we move forward, are there competing theories about how life originated on Earth and how it became the plethora that it is now? Yes, there are. Are any of them science? No, they are not. So let's move forward with the science, because this is science class. So this is one of the best examples we have of evolution. So we were able to track the development of our modern day whales all the way back to this ancient ancestor it had called Pakicetus. And we were able to track moving up through the layers of the fossils, collecting specimens. And there are certain skeletal features that are shared in all members of this family, and only in members of this family. And by tracking that, we were able to determine the changes that occurred over millions upon millions of years as this animal started kind of more of a dog-like weasel thing, and then clearly started living more and more on the water's edge and in the water, losing hair to reduce drag, like swimmers today will shave off their body hair in order to reduce the amount of drag and speed themselves up in the water. The limbs changing shape a little bit, better suited for swimming. As that time continued, on and on and on, especially the rear legs, basically starting to disappear. But even in today's modern cetaceans that you can see down here, dolphins and whales, if you were to dissect them along the spinal cord, where you would expect to find hips, you will still find hips. You will still find the pelvis and the femur, the long bone of the legs, and a collection of smaller bones that would have been the lower legs. Those leftovers still exist inside the whale, telling us that they had 4 functional legs at one point. So we have some excellent evidences for evolution, and this is one of them, the evolution of whales. Now, of course, if we're talking about who you need to know, it's gotta be Charles Darwin. In our last unit, Gregor Mendel was the one name that you needed to know. Now it is Darwin. So one of the things that I really like going over is I want to point out to everyone that Darwin was not a super genius. He was not an Einstein of his time. Darwin was actually a pretty regular dude. But as important for all the capabilities that somebody can have is also to be the right person in the right place at the right time. And that's who Darwin really was. So Darwin went on board the HMS Beagle, this frigate, schooner, I don't know nautical terms, this sailing ship. And it was designed to go all around the world as long as you don't count hardly any of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, or Indonesia. And this was expected to take 2 years, and it was 5 before he returned home. That's a long time to be traveling on a boat. And obviously, the best known example are the Galapagos Islands, because when he arrived at the Galapagos Islands, he started to see these really bizarre animals, and it made him start thinking. Namely, he started thinking about the South American animals. He was just in South America, and he saw their finches and their tortoises and their iguanas. And then he got to these islands, which are off the coast of South America, and he saw their finches and tortoises and iguanas. And he said to himself, wow, that's a big difference. Why? That was made even more abundant when the mayor of this area, or magistrate, whoever the leader of this area was at the time, had commented to him over dinner that he could identify what island a tortoise came from based on what the shell looked like. And so in cataloging that, Darwin discovered that across the Galapagos Islands, there are 8 different species of giant tortoise. And you have to remember, at the time period, all the reasons that people were educated with were all religious reasons, Christian reasons. It was all because God willed it this way, because God made it this way. That was the education. And so Darwin was left with the very real question: why would God create 8 different versions of a tortoise to go on these different islands, but they're very close to each other? All the islands have the same environment. They're all the same temperatures during the day and night. They all have the same sort of plants growing on them. They have all the same other organisms growing. Why have different versions of a tortoise? One version of a tortoise would easily be able to survive just as well as all these variants do. And so that started him thinking. And that thinking was very important. Now, in his journal, and this is actually a picture from the Museum of Natural History in, I think it's London or just England in general. This is from his actual notebook. You'll notice he started it with the words, "I think." And then he sketched out his early idea for what a family tree, an evolutionary tree, might look like. And then down here, he started talking about how the different species might be similar or dissimilar based on how closely related they are due to having a common ancestor. And that's going to be the key for almost all of evolution, is this concept of a common ancestor. So don't be surprised. Now, from that, he had this idea for what he called natural selection. And basically, what Darwin said was that the best adapted organisms will survive. And then, through heredity, they will pass on those traits that made them successful. So we start with this one, right? It survives, it has 3 offspring. They're all a little bit different from each other. The lightest colored one, that is not a good mutation. That is not a good trait, and it is selected against. Natural selection eliminates it. So then the 2 survivors, they have children. There are some variations there. Once again, in this environment, the lightest ones will still be the ones that are selected against, because maybe it's a dark environment, and the darker colors allow them to blend in better. All right, so once again, those survivors have their own offspring with more variations. Now you can see where we started with the whole population in this light gray color. Now they're considerably darker in just a few generations. This is the concept of natural selection. It is survival of the fittest. The best adapted survive, the inferior will die. And therefore, the entire species will change, will morph into these new, better traits over generations. This doesn't happen in an individual. One beetle doesn't look at other beetles and go, "Oh, I should be green," and change green. It has to be generation by generation that these small changes build up. So he made some observations. First of all, Darwin said if everything born survived, then the population would explode. This is human population. Excuse me. I'm still having some issues. I don't know why. I'm okay. You can see how the human population started to just take off. Basically, right after we really worked on medicine and hygiene, our survival rate went through the roof. And we went from less than 1 billion to over 8 billion in less than 500 years. That's crazy. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen because populations in the wild are stable, more or less. They may have good years and bad years, but, if there are rabbits, you're probably going to see rabbits every year. You're not going to get flooded with rabbits, and they're not going to go extinct. There's going to remain a stable number. Okay, so if everyone survived, population would skyrocket, but it doesn't. It stays stable. So what does that mean? It means that something has to be limiting growth. And in this case, Darwin said, well, it's got to be resources. It's got to be the available food, water, territory, mates. It has to be something that these animals need. He also noticed that difference, that not all members of a single generation are the same. They have these slight differences from each other. And so he said, all right, if we make more babies than can survive, than the environment can handle, then that means that they must compete. They must struggle against one another. And only a small fraction of them will survive to adulthood to make the next generation. Therefore, there is a level of what we call fitness. And he figured that we could measure the number of traits the organism had that made it advantageous in its environment. And the more of these good, well-adapted traits an individual has, the higher their fitness is. The higher their fitness is, the more offspring they're going to produce. And finally, then, he ended it out with this idea that due to the variation and therefore unequal fitness, some organisms will have more favorable traits than other ones, that the entire population would shift over time, accumulating or building more and more of these favorable traits, like how this moth slowly becomes more of a red-orange color. Maybe that helps them blend in. Or maybe it warns predators, I'm poisonous, you don't want to eat me. So finally, his theory, Darwin's original theory, ended this way, that organisms must compete with the traits they have, that only the best and most fit organisms will survive to reproduce, and then they will pass on those traits to their offspring. Why are all lions that same golden brown color? Because if you're a lion and you're a little bit too light or a little bit too dark, you die. You're not the right color to blend in. So natural selection has eliminated those color variances, really just down to that one dominant color that really gives them their advantage. So this is the theory of natural selection. If any of you are interested, check another video on this YouTube channel. I decided to put together some footage from Ark Survival Evolved, kind of showing how natural selection can build up in a population in order to make them stronger and more fit than they were before. Check it out. I would love to know what people think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great day, and as always, I'll see you in class.